Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space, talking the street photography recipe with Mr. Dotan Saguy. Dotan, welcome back. How are you?
Good, Scott. Thanks for having me on. This is an exciting topic. I'm always happy to talk about.
We're always happy to talk about it with you. We're always happy to have you here. So welcome back. It's good to see you again. Everybody who's joining us here on Zoom, Vimeo, and Facebook. I can't see you, but I know you're here. I could feel your presence. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here. Today is a little bit different. We're going to do something a little bit different than what we usually do. So Dotan is actually going to be asking you some questions, asking you to get a little interactive. So we're going to open the chat up so that you can take part in that. So he'll throw out some questions to you guys, and we're hoping that you'll respond, and that'll kind of take us through this whole webinar. But Dotan will kind of break it down a little bit further and explain a little bit more. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to get them in. If you're joining us here on Zoom, you can use the Q&A tab, or if you're joining us on Vimeo or Facebook, you can use the comment section. But otherwise, you'll hear my voice just to let Dotan know where we're going and where we're headed. It's a little, I'll give you a hint. It's like a choose your own adventure style today, which is kind of fun. Always my favorite books as a kid. But I'm going to hand it over to Dotan, say thanks for being here again, and we'll see you in a little bit.
Awesome. All right, everybody sees the screen. Hi again. This is Dotan Saguy, and I'm a photographer out of Los Angeles, for those who don't know me. I've been on this program a few times, so feel free to look up the other presentations if you like this one. But today is going to be all about my recipe for street photography. So essentially, it's my own secret sauce, if you will. It's how I practice street photography. So I'm going to be sharing a lot of that. So just my background quickly for those who aren't familiar, I am a self-taught street photographer who has turned professional in the past few years, so fairly recently. I'm an author of 2 photo books that were published by the German publisher Kehrer Verlag. One in 2018, that was Venice Beach, to the left, and one in 2020 called Nowhere to Go But Everywhere, which is more of a documentary style book. And so anyway, like I said, if you want more about my background, we're not going to talk too much about me because this is more about how I do street photography. But if you want to learn more about my journey, there's several videos on that on YouTube that were recorded in previous programs. So I would say that I bring a little bit of a unique perspective to street photography, and I think that's what's going to make it interesting today. And I came originally to professional photography fairly recently, as I mentioned, as a second career. And my first career was as a software engineer, and well, at least that's how I was trained. And I have an engineering background with, I'd say, a knack for kind of distilling the best practices into easy to follow methods. So you see where I'm going here. This is not something I just do with street photography, but street photography is such a complex thing that it was a really fun puzzle for me to try to break this down into parts that can be, taught to somebody else. And the third part about me is I love teaching. So if you put all this together, you could see why I would come up with a recipe like this, even for something that I think many would say there is no recipe to street photography. You just go on the street and you shoot. And and I think a lot of people maybe think that, and maybe some have limited success with that. So I'm proposing a little bit of a more of a structured way of approaching it, which I hope is productive for everyone. So street photography, just to kind of give you a little bit of background. I'm sure a lot of you guys are street photographers, and please, chime in the chat. As Scott said, we're going to make this interactive. So for all the street photographers out there, you know how hard it is. I think it's one of the hardest things, you can do as a photographer, street photography. Why? Because one, you need to find interesting moments in everyday life in the street, which is already pretty hard. Like, forget the camera. Let's say you went without a camera with the mission to find interesting moments. You may not, that would be hard. Then you need to approach strangers, usually, because that's all about people in the street photography is. So that's kind of scary. And so that's, another thing that is not obvious. Then once you've approached the strangers, you need to capture them. You capture a situation at its peak in a well-composed way, well lit, but without posing anyone and without staging anything. So because those are kind of the rules of photojournalism and street photography. So if you add all these things up, it's kind of like a Mission Impossible type of thing. And that's why I think one can use all the help they can get. And this is why I'm here today. So I think that's why many photographers limit themselves to either posed street portraits. A lot of students who come to my workshops, when I ask what do they do as street photography, a lot of them kind of limit themselves to posed street portraits or the typical sort of walking person shot like I have here as a, just to illustrate the point. But there's so many ways you can go beyond that. I mean, there's the street photography. If you look at the masters and so on, they go so far beyond that. But it's just a matter of learning the right approach and getting comfortable with it. So this is what today's all about. So this recipe of mine is quite comprehensive, as you'll see in a second, and there is no way I can cover everything in an hour. And that's where the choose your own adventure, approach comes into play here. What we're going to do is I'll talk about everything that's in there at first, for about 10 minutes or less. I'm going to try to make it as short as possible. And once I go through the whole thing, I will let you vote for your own favorite topic out of this recipe. And don't worry, you don't need to take notes or anything. I'll show you a slide when I'm done with the whole, overview, and you can pick out of that slide which topic interests you most. So let's get started. I'm going to now go over the whole thing, and it's going to be a little bit of a, it's going to be a lot in just a few minutes. And then we'll get to vote on which topic, and then I'll pick a few topics, as many as we can get through within this the framework of this talk, and then I'll go and launch myself into the details of each one that we picked. So first, the whole thing. So module 1 is all about picking the right equipment, the right camera for street photography. And there, I know there's a lot of strong opinions. This is a very, I think everybody has very strong opinions about this. I'm not getting paid by any brand or any store to promote, any particular equipment. So this is an objective look on my part. And I look objectively as what are the criteria for successful street photography? Like, what kind of equipment can help you stay stealth? How quickly you can react with that camera? What kind of lens does it need to have to capture certain scenes? That kind of stuff. So it's all based on actual objective criteria. Then in this module of my recipe, I review all the options that are available from the market with their pros and cons at a high level, not like model by model, but just to review what's available. And I show what the professionals use and why different professionals use different kinds of equipment, because it's not one camera. I mean, otherwise, it's not just one camera for everybody. Everybody has a camera that's better for them. And then finally, I cover how you can find the one that's right for you. So this is that's that first module, finding the right camera. Second module, again, we're going to go through the whole thing, and then I'll let you vote on the topics that you prefer. Second module is about how to photograph strangers, and the first part of this is why it's scary and the actual steps that you can take to actually overcome that fear in a very practical way. I provide some tried and true methods to photograph strangers in a candid way. Again, this is not about posed photography. This is all candid. And then I go into legal and ethical obligations that we have as photographers. I know this is a very popular topic on these B&H presentations. I always get a lot of questions about the legal aspect of this and ethical. So, watch out for this one. I'm sure this will be a popular vote. The third module, there's 5 modules in total, so just so you have a sense of the whole thing. The third one is a very common issue. You're in the street right now, and often, I mean, it happens to me too. We get stuck not knowing what to do next. Either we're underwhelmed by, there's not enough happening in the street, or there's too much happening, or we're just, not, we haven't found our groove yet. And I would call that sort of the photographer's block or the street photographer's block. And so the question is, how do we actually go about finding opportunities and having a little bit of a method to do that, to doing that? So in this module, I talk about letting go of the myths about, the romantic myths that we get told about, the photo kind of finds you and the serendipitous things that happen. And, I mean, it's fine and all. It does happen from time to time. But I think if you have a method to finding the right opportunities, you're going to be a lot more successful. So I start talking about finding the right place and what that right place is. Going at the right time and what that means, to make your luck, to not just be at the mercy of serendipitous things that might happen in your backyard. I talk about how to look for opportunities, and there I have 4 techniques that I've developed to find interesting moments to photograph. So if you think about it, if you're stuck in the street and you don't know what to do next, it's really nice to have that menu of 4 different things that you could potentially do to find a great opportunity to shoot. So having that menu in mind often just, is very freeing. And just like with a restaurant menu, sometimes we're hungry for one thing and sometimes another. It really depends on our mood, what kind of photographer you are, whether you prefer to not, introduce yourself to people or you prefer to, to stay, hidden. And, so depending on who you are and what you're in the mood for that day, it's really nice to have that menu of things that you can do. And then last but not least, in this module, I talk about consciously and deliberately knowing what to look for that you personally are attracted to. We all have different interests and that shape our styles. So you might be really into right now I'm doing a project about dogs, so that's just kind of what I'm looking for in the street. I'm looking for funny moments with dogs. So but being aware of your likes and dislikes and having that as sort of your guide for shaping your style. Fourth module is all about capturing the moment. So again, let's go back to that, mindset of we're in the street, we've pursued a promising opportunity now, and the question is, how do we capture that moment successfully when it happens? So I talk about what camera settings you're better off having. Again, it's kind of making your luck. So how do we have the most chance of capturing that shot with the right camera settings? Common mistakes that will ruin the shot and that I've seen people do and I have done myself and how to avoid them. And then last in this module is the magic formula of D, I, and M. And this is kind of another secret sauce within the secret sauce of how kind of the magic formula about capturing the moment the right way, essentially, and having criteria to follow to actually do that the right way, where it's not just left to chance. The last module and the fifth one is about selecting your best images. And I think editing is incredibly important because assuming you went through all the things we just said, you were in the street, you found the right opportunity, you pursued it, you actually shot it. If you're not able to find the absolute best shot in that series of shots that you took, then you might as well not have shot it. So it's really important to know how to do this. And so I explained, I have basically a method that I can provide that basically explains how to edit like a pro. And by editing here, I mean just picking the right picture. Processing is the actual photoshopping or not photoshopping in terms of hiding things or whatever, or adding anything. Is toning and maybe cropping and that sort of thing. So I explained how to pick the right images and then how to use processing as sort of a second chance to make things perfect. Again, we're not messing with the image in terms of adding or removing anything. It's just about the toning and doing anything, all the things that are you're allowed to do to the picture, but to really enhance the picture in a way that will not just make it prettier, but it will make it more effective. So here, this is all about making the picture more effective. Then I talk about leaving time for digesting and how the role of time in selecting the right images and making sure you've got them processed right. And then I talk about things like editing for single images, like street photographs versus long-term projects that are like more like a photo story. And finally, I can provide tips to win photo contests, and that's all part of this fifth module. So this is all I'm going to, yeah, so now you see all the topics in one screen. And I'd like at this point for people to start voting. You can, so just use the blue, the things that are in blue, like 3A, 5B. Just don't type the whole title in, just type in the number and the letter that you're interested in, and just try to just vote once per person. And then we'll see, what we get as a, overall. Scott will try and do the math of what seems to be the most popular topic. Now, depending on how meaty these topics are, some can take a while and some are very short. So we'll see how many we can handle in this hour. I'm going to try and do as many as possible, because I really want to give you some information that you can go and take to your next shoot and really be effective with it. But we might just end up on one that takes the whole, the whole presentation. So we'll see what we get, which is the exciting part about the choose your own adventure thing.
So we're getting a lot of 3s and a lot of 4s currently, Dotan.
Okay.
A lot of 3s and 4s. Yeah, it looks like those are the front runners so far. Oh, the 2s are the 2s are rolling in, the 4s, the 3s. Yeah, wow. Okay. I think the 2s and the 3s are taking it. Do we want to give a couple more seconds here?
Yeah. Let's as long as you see it, be very active. I want to leave people enough time to express their choice, because this is what this is all about.
That's the whole fun of the choose your own adventure.
Exactly. And that way I also know I'm going to talk about something people actually care about, because they picked it.
That is true. That is true. For some reason, I always died in those books. I always wound up at the death area. didn't go.
Well, nobody's dying today.
That's the good news.
This will, but hopefully people can get some little nuggets of wisdom they can take to their next shoot, and
So it looks like 4 is definitely the front runner, followed by 3 very closely.
Do you have any specifics in terms of A, B, C, D?
We've got for 3, we've got some D's. For 4, we've got some C's. Let's see, we've got 4A, we've got another 4C. But most of them were general overall. So I think they were just broken down into they love the whole topic.
Okay, so let's if it seems, I think we could go into 3D, how to look for opportunities. That sounds like it's a popular topic. The DIM thing would take the whole time and maybe more. So I think we should probably jump into 3D then. How to look for opportunities. How does that sound?
Let's go for it.
All right. So I've got my sort of matrix of like which slide to jump to, and magical. Look at that. How to look for opportunities. Can you see it? Is it?
I see it. Yep. Opportunity.
All right.
Look.
So let's jump right in. I don't know how long this will take. We're on an adventure together today, so I'm going to try and improvise this as best I can. This is something I've taught before, but obviously I hadn't rehearsed the whole program. So anyway, so let's. So I'm going to put this in the context of the rest of it's really my masterclass is what I call it, but here I called it my recipe for the sake of this presentation. So let's say we've done some research about the time and place, because that's kind of what precedes this in the module. And so we're not just randomly going like in the street, at the front in front of our apartment just for convenience. We've actually researched a good place to go to. We've figured out what time that place is actually active, and we might have the best chance of capturing an interesting moment. And let's say we've done the drive all the way to that park or that busy street or that promenade or boardwalk that really is happening, and it's booming. We get there and it's really like the best time, to get there. So what do we do now? That's really the next step. So it's a question of this methodology to know what it's that menu I was talking about. So I guess I sold the menu well, because this is where we're going now. So that menu, I call it the 4 Fs of street photography. And it's like a restaurant menu, and it's basically based on what you're in the mood for. So we're going to go into all the Fs, and then you'll see the whole menu sort of revealed, and then you can use this. This is one that I highly recommend sort of memorizing. And if you can't memorize it, just put it on a little piece of paper in your pocket. Every time you're stuck, just pull that piece of paper out, and then you've got your choices.
I just want to jump in real quick, Dotan,
Yeah.
because we do have a question from John, and this is relevant. If you could just go over, what does DIM stand for?
Design, information, and moment. But it's like a really long. It's a much more complex than what it sounds like. But it's yes. But this would be a different part of the whole thing. It's more about how to capture the moment. But yeah. So this is something. Actually, I think I might have done a presentation at some point with you guys on that. So maybe Googling YouTube after, or searching YouTube after this might give you some more hints on what I teach on DIM. But so for now, I'm just going to stick with this menu of that helps with the photographer's block in the street. So is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, so I'm gonna jump into this. So first is of how to look for opportunities is fishing. So that's the first. So I guess on the top of your menu you have fish as your first possible course. So fishing is something that actually someone like Cartier-Bresson did a lot. This is what he was famous for. A lot of these photos, when you look at them in the context of this presentation, you'll realize he was fishing. And all you need to fish is a pond. So when you're in the street and you've got that photographer's block, and you're like, oh, I feel like, I'll tell you more about what it is to fish, but all you need at that point is to find a pond. And so fishing is basically you find a busy spot, or something that has a really interesting foreground or background. So it can be like a wall with street art on it, and and a bunch of and it's like a plaza with a lot of people coming through, and there's this beautiful graffiti wall or street art wall in the background. That's a pond, metaphorically speaking, in terms of street photography. So here, this is a great example from Norwegian photographer Jonas Bendiksen, who's a Magnum photographer. He literally found a pond to fish at, and he just basically waited patiently for the right moment and the right composition to get that shot. So when you're fishing, and this is actually something I love using myself as well, is finding those metaphorical ponds in the street and realizing what they are, great background, lots of people coming through, things moving around, and you just wait for the right composition. So it's really just like fishing. You're waiting. It requires patience and a good eye for composition, and figuring out the right timing of this, but essentially you're fishing. Here's another example of fishing. And this is Henri Cartier-Bresson, and this was something from Seville, Spain. And how do we know that he was fishing? Well, we have several images that were made in that series, and he was basically, he stayed there for a while with all those kids. So what he saw was this wall that was probably destroyed by war, or there was a civil war in Spain around that time. So maybe this is from that. But he saw that opening in the wall, and he found, the actual location, like the background, very interesting composition-wise. But there's also a lot happening in that within this frame, like the kids were playing. So he waited for the kids to be, he probably stayed there. I don't know for how long. I never had the chance to ask him, but he probably stayed there for a while and just watched them play and just try to get and had that composition locked in, ready to press the shutter, and kept fishing at that pond basically for a while. We actually have the whole contact sheet, so we can see. We don't have the timestamps, I don't think, on there, or maybe we do. But anyway, you can see that he actually took way more than one shot and tried all kinds of things. At some point, he even tried to compose it vertically and so on. So if you're not in a fishing mood, another great option is to follow. And so that's our second F on the menu. And so the follow is all you need for the follow. We saw that with fishing, all you needed was a pond. With follow, all you need is a character. So what constitutes a character? How do you know somebody's a character? Well, it can be basically anything that stands out. It could be, somebody who's dressed weird or in an interesting fashion. It could be someone who carries a dead fish like this. It could, anything that stands out to you as, this looks like a real character, or it could be somebody who behaves in a way that's very, that stands out. So any of these things can be characters. And so if you're in the mood for, that kind of photography with, the character, then you need to follow them, because typically those characters aren't going to just stay there, and you don't want them to pose for you. You want a candid photo with them. So at that point, you kind of have to make the decision. Do you want to make it stealth and follow them without them noticing you, which can be a little creepy, depending. In some situations, like let's say it's a carnival or something, that might be totally appropriate to follow somebody. But in the case of some random person in the street and there's no event happening, you may want to engage in conversation with that person and introduce yourself and explain what you're doing first. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I know with street photography, we're trying to take candid photos of people, but nothing prevents you from introducing yourself and creating that connection with that person so that they are comfortable with you following them, and they've actually approved that, like they're willing participants in this. And you can even explain that you want a candid photo and you don't want them to look at the camera and you just want them to pretend like you're not there. That is completely kosher, from a street photography standpoint. So so you need to make that decision, I guess, is my point. Once you follow that character, or you decide to follow that character, I often do it. I was mentioning that dog project that I do right now. Often I will start by complimenting the person on their dog. If I find like this might be a dog that could be interesting in a photo, and maybe the dog is dressed up in some way or something, and I will engage in conversation with the owner first and ask if it's okay for me to follow them for a little while. So it's completely okay sorry, it's completely okay for you to engage in conversation with that person and figure out whether they're okay with you following them. So here I was following a person in Havana. This was in Cuba, and he was trying to sell this fish, and he was going door to door to different people he knew to see if they wanted the fish. And I ended up in situations where there's a dog that comes out and licks the fish. And it gave me several opportunities just by following that person. We ended up coming across this little girl with a really weird looking dog, and her grandma, and then he still was like passing, so I was basically at that point I was trying to be stealth. So I was pretending to photograph the girl, and I was waiting for him to come into the frame with the fish. And then finally, there's this parting situation where he just walked away and there were a couple of cars and they were engaged in conversation, old American cars in Cuba, very kind of classic, old, classic car scene. But again, that fish was the reason I bumped into all this. So following can actually be quite fruitful in terms of getting multiple shots from the same exact situation, because you're following the person for as long as they let you. You're going to be able to have different opportunities to see how people react to them, or different things that happen with them. Fishing and following, if you're not in the mood for either fishing or following, there's something that we call farming, which is this more of a documentary approach to it. So if you're in a chatty mood, or if you're very extroverted and you just love engaging with people and making some friends, then I would say go farming. That's a very good menu choice. And Susan Miselas is another Magnum photographer, and she created an amazing body of work by gaining access to a group of teenage girls in her own Little Italy neighborhood of New York. And she ended up documenting this group for many, many years. And I think she actually followed them as adults, in their marriages and so on, and family life. And so she has an amazing body of work on them. So I'm not saying you should become move from street photography to documentary photography necessarily, but what I would say is, sometimes in the street, you would find yourself in a situation, you find, say, a group of skateboarders or something, and it seems kind of daunting to just creep up on them and try to take some random pictures, and you may not get the best pictures. But if you start kind of creating a relationship with them and explaining what you're doing and showing them some of the photos, and kind of getting their permission to hang out with them, you might end up basically getting much better photographs, because you're there for a longer period of time. They're okay with you being there, and you want to instruct them that they shouldn't be looking at the camera, and after a while they just forget about you because they keep doing what they're doing. You just have the permission to being the fly on the wall. And this is exactly what happened to me. This is a picture from my Venice Beach book, and this was in a van with a group of hippies that were coming through town, and were staying there for a few days. But I had first built trust with them on the boardwalk as they were singing with our guitar and everything. And we had, I photographed them for a little while, and I shared some of the photographs with them. So I got sort of re-invited into their daily life the next day. And this is how this shot came about. So this was in their van with, lots of things happening. And you got the the cigarette and the little joint action up on the top, and you got this guy talking to the dog, and the guy stone in the background, and you got the animal pants on the left. I mean, there's a guitar thing, and there's a skateboard at the bottom. I mean, there's so many things going on in this image. I actually printed it to 40 by 60, and I saw even more things like the spines of the books, and there's just so much in there. But that wouldn't have happened without engaging with this group and really getting permission to being there, and them also forgetting about me being there, because I was just that fly on the wall. This is another shot from Cuba where people are open and friendly and everything, but and so building trust with this couple who was rebuilding a house there, the house that had fallen apart from a hurricane. And I was allowed to stay there, and after a while they just kind of forget that I'm there, but I'm allowed to be there. So you get those candid scenes that you otherwise would not get. So this is all about farming. Another one from Cuba. Because you're allowed to being there for a long period of time, you can start composing and juxtaposing scenes. So here I have the people drinking in the foreground and the people jumping off the rocks in the background, and I'm able to time, to get sort of that perfect moment where it's juxtaposed, because I was able to stay for that long. It's not something I would ever have been able to get on the fly in the street, just kind of a hit and run kind of thing. This really required being there for enough time to get those two elements to juxtapose properly. Last, but not least of the F's on that menu is foreseeing. And which is essentially, I mean, I named it foreseeing for the F aspect, but it's really all about anticipating. And it's all about observing intently and trying to anticipate moments around you. So this one I would say is kind of the default mode when I go into Venice Beach or some other area that's good for street photography. I start by when I don't know which menu item I'm going to go after, I just start being just very aware of my surroundings and trying to anticipate what might happen with different things that are unfolding. So, in this situation here for this shot, a skate park is perfect for anticipating because people practice, and when they practice, they do things over and over and over again. So this was a jump that somebody was doing, and they were trying to get it right and land it right. And so in this case, it was very easy to foresee what would happen. They would just keep doing it until they were able to land it. And while observing that, I was trying to figure out the best way of capturing it. And I didn't want it just a sports, shot. I wanted something a little more interesting, a little more mysterious. And I realized that the shadow was crossing the skate park in a very interesting way. And that in some instances, you could really tell the silhouette of the skateboarder and their shadow. So I went on top of a bench and try to get this, but it's only because this guy was doing this maybe 10 times that I was able to get the shot maybe at the 8th time or something. So it's not something that happened and I randomly pointed my camera. It's really the anticipation that got me there. This is another foreseeing moment where I was just, this happened very quickly. I saw this guy dressed, the way he's dressed, and this woman with who looks very, very young, with who's obviously pregnant. And so I was like, oh my God, what is this about? And then I got ready to take the shot, and then at that point he started raising this flower, and I think it's a paper flower. And I mean, I was lucky because the reason I anticipated is because of the characters, and then I just was able to take the shot on the fly. I think I have 3 shots, and then I walked away. So this was very much sort of foreseeing, anticipating quickly, and being able to react. So yeah, like I mentioned earlier, you can anticipate random scenes as you walk down the street, and then go into different parts of that menu based on what you see. So that's I think the best way to approach this menu. One is when you're stuck, you're just like photographer's block, you feel overwhelmed or you feel confused, and you just go back to these as choices and they inspire you to pursue one or the other. But another way to go about this is you just go into the street when you first start photographing, you first start your session, and you start with foreseeing. That's kind of your default mode, and you're trying to anticipate different things. So you're intently watching different things evolve around you and trying to anticipate anything that might develop into something. So you're in foreseeing mode. But let's say you bump into a great background or a busy spot that you feel might be great for fishing. You might wait and fish there a little bit. Or as you do this, let's say not much is going on, there's not enough in that pond that you feel like it's not going to yield anything after staying there for 5 minutes or so, but there's a great character who comes along somehow, and you're like, oh, I'm going to do a follow. So, and you're consciously basically, okay, I'm going from fishing mode to follow mode, and so it's time to do a follow. And then let's say that character joins a group of really interesting people, but you feel like really to get the shot, you would have to engage with them. And then you go into farming. So that's the end of that topic. I'm going to go back to our list. And yeah, so hopefully that was helpful. What I would love to do now is if we could go into a little bit of a Q&A mode, if people have any questions, and then maybe we'll have time to do something else after that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we can lead it off here. We've got a question in already. So anybody else who has any questions, get them in now. Otherwise, Dotan's going to keep banging out some information. But Daniel on Vimeo wanted to know which is the most dominant style color or black and white, and some potential outlets for my images. So I think he wants to know what do you, in your opinion, color, black and white, how do you feel,
I
what's
mean, that's a very personal choice. It's like asking if I like blue or red better.
I was gonna say that's like saying do you like the outside of the Oreo cookie or the inside or the whole entire
Exactly.
thing together.
Exactly. No, that's a very personal choice. That really is, whatever you feel better at. I'll just tell you my own experiences. I traditionally felt more attracted to black and white. So I've had shot that for a long time, and I shot a little bit of color. We've seen some of a couple of the color images that I was showing from Cuba. But at the end of the day, I think my real love is black and white. So, I actually right now I'm shooting a monochrome camera. So it's the Leica monochrome, and I'm only using that at the moment. I'm not using any color camera. So yeah, but that's a highly personal decision. But if we can stick to questions that are pertinent to what we just covered in the how to look for opportunities, that would be great. So we can keep you know, the theme going.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dotan. Sorry about that.
No. Once, I mean, if there's not too many questions or anything, we can identify the next one to jump into, and that way we make the most of the
Yeah,
time.
definitely. I think we could jump into it. I know we said 4 was very popular as well. We did get some specifics in 4A and 4C.
Okay, I would say let's go for A, because C is massive and we won't have time to cover it today. I'd just be able to do the beginning and then it'll just be a tease. So I'm gonna go with 4A, and we'll bleed into B if we have time.
Awesome.
Okay, all right, 4A, 322, go. All right, wow, magic. All right, so camera settings. So my sort of philosophy with camera settings is simplify, simplify, simplify. And the reason is, I'm just giving you, before I jump into the whole thing, I'm giving you a little bit of context. Like I mentioned at the very beginning of this talk, street photography is really, really, really hard. And getting that moment, following people in the right way and so on is just so hard that I try and really simplify everything else that I can, that I have control over. So in that spirit, I like to set everything to automatic that I can, and only retain creative control over the things that really matter to me in terms of really making that image sing. So that means I relinquish control over ISO. I trust the camera to pick the right ISO. And the reason is, I think we're at a point now in technology where ISO is not with modern cameras, ISO is no longer the bottleneck. You're not going to find a situation in the street where ISO is going to be, your images are going to be too grainy or whatever because of the ISO. So I leave the camera decide on ISO. I also let the camera select the shutter speed for the most of the shots, unless I need something where I feel like creatively I really need that camera to I need the movement to be seen in the picture, and somehow do some sort of creative thing with the movement. I don't select the shutter speed. I just want the image to be sharp. So I leave it on auto shutter speed, and there's a setting in my camera where it's actually a setting for ISO that it will basically go all the way down to, I think I set it to 250th of a second, so that it's sharp enough. And even if I move the camera slightly, or if the subject is moving fast, at 250th of a second, at a minimum, I should be able to get it. So it won't go slower than 250th of a second. And that's what I set. If you're, either moving your camera a lot, or you're photographing faster subjects like cars or motorcycles or something, you might want to choose, 500th of a second as the minimum speed, or 1,000th of a second. But the point is, to set it, in the menu, just frees you up. You don't have to think about shutter speed. You don't have to think about ISO. So this is the menu I was talking about. And the rule of thumb there's a little bit of a formula. I don't want to get too mathematical on you guys here, but based on the lens that you use, the focal length that you use, I would use at least 1/4 of that focal length. So if you're using a 35 millimeter, multiply 35 by 4, that's what, 150th of it. So that would make 150th of a second should be your slowest speed, so that you have a sharp image. I said I was at 250th of a second, so I'm slightly faster than that, just to have that buffer, just to make sure that it's going to be sharp. So if you're using, on the other hand, if you're using a really ultra wide, like a 1/20th, a 20 millimeter lens, then you could get away with 100th of a second, or maybe 125th of a second shutter speed. If you're using something longer, on the other hand, if you're using like an 80 millimeter, for example, then you need a higher minimum shutter speed. I hope that makes sense to everybody. I get confused with math myself sometimes, so I hope that was clear enough. But the point is, you want to free yourself from having that shutter speed decision. So having something built, in your camera settings that does that for you is perfect. Exposure compensation, I shoot a camera that tends to lose the highlights more than the shadows. So I set it automatically to underexpose by 2/3 or 1 stop to preserve the highlights, depending on the situation, obviously. If it's an overcast day, you can get away with not underexposing at all. But if it's really bright and sunny and there's, you might shoot, with the sun in the background, I find that it's useful to underexpose a little bit. And again, I just kind of set it and forget it. It's something I see, what the weather is like when I start shooting. I just set that. And then unless the situation changes and clouds roll in or something, I just leave it. Now, the images might look too dark. They won't look good on the screen. But then again, you're not supposed to look at the screen when you're shooting. You just want to, you don't want to get distracted by what's on the screen. And even if they're dark on the screen, it's something that once you process them, the images will look much better. So, and you'll be preserving the shadows, you'll be, and preserving the highlights, and it'll be good. It's just, it may not look good on the screen at that moment. One thing, and this, I know it gets some people mad when I talk about this, because people are very, they're opinionated when it comes to, zooms versus, prime lenses. And there's a whole debate, and I'm sure you could find lots and lots of forum discussions on the topic. Again, this is my personal recipe, so it's you do with it what you will, and everyone has their own preferences. But I find, again, in that context of simplifying, it's much easier to anticipate the framing of your shot if you work with a single focal length. And personally, I work with only with a 35 millimeter lens. That's what I go shoot with. I don't have a zoom in my bag. I just have that one lens on. It's 35 millimeter, so it's a wide angle, but not super wide. And I shoot with it so much that I know exactly, without even putting the camera to my eye, exactly what I would get by standing at a certain distance of the subject. So I can sort of pre-compose the image in my head, even without lifting the camera to my eye. And that's really valuable because it doesn't give me away right away. So if I want to stay stealth, that's actually great, because I can keep the camera on its strap, and nobody knows that I'm about to take a picture. And you can also preset the focal length on your zoom. If you shoot with a zoom, I would encourage you to try this. If you force yourself to only shoot at a certain focal length, it doesn't have to be 35. You might be more of a 50 millimeter person, or 28, or whatever your preference is. Pick one focal length and tape your zoom and see, and keep it that way for, I don't know, a month or something, enough time that you get used to that focal length. And you'll see how that really simplifies everything for you, that you don't have to think about where to stand, because intuitively where to stand, because you know exactly what's going to be in your shot if you stand at, here versus there. So in the context of me using this prime lens, this is actually the one I use. I can actually set when I go out I get out of my car, I go out in the street to shoot. I actually have it preset to a focusing distance of about 10 feet, because this is kind of where I expect the subject might be. And I also set a default aperture of f8, because first, it's very sunny here in California, and and f8 gives me plenty of depth of field. So I know that everything will be clear behind the 10 feet of the focusing distance, and even in front, a little bit in front of the focusing distance. So that essentially what that does is it turns my camera in a point and shoot is essentially what it does. And this is in the context of me working with a manual focus lens, so I have to pre-focus it. And the pre-focusing that I decide to do is 10 feet from me and f8 as far as the aperture, and that way I am good to go. So, I mean, this was a short one. I'll actually launch into the next one, which I think people also wanted to hear about the common mistakes that will ruin a shot. To conclude on that point, camera settings, it's all about simplifying, because capturing that moment is so hard. Finding the right moment, getting in that right situation, composing it the right way, framing it the right way, getting that right light, all these things are much more important than other things. So the more you can simplify your camera settings and almost use your camera like a point and shoot, the better off you are. So let's talk about common mistakes for a bit. I don't know how much time left do we have, Scott? It sounds like maybe 5-10 minutes or so.
Yeah, about 5-10 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, I think this will do. So we should be able to get through this topic. So this goes without saying at this point, but shooting RAW is the only correct setting. Don't shoot JPEGs. People used to shoot JPEGs because cards were expensive, memory was expensive. At this point, I mean, I actually forgot cards in a different photo bag last weekend, and I went to CVS and I got a memory card for $20, and I mean, it's basically a no-brainer at this point. Memory's so cheap. Shoot RAW. It doesn't matter if you fill your cards faster, or if you get a 256 gigabyte card, you will never fill it in even on a whole vacation or something, even shooting RAW. So it's it goes without saying everybody should shoot RAW. And the reason you shoot RAW, by the way, is you have so much more flexibility in post to dodge and burn and darken some areas, lighten other areas, and so on. If you shoot JPEG, all you have is what you got. So if you underexpose slightly, that's it. You can't really recover very much. And I like to underexpose because I like those juicy, shadows and stuff. I want to get detail out of there. The only way to get detail out of shadows is to shoot RAW, even if it takes slightly more room on your card. So I won't expand more than that. It's like beating a dead horse, but shoot RAW. Make sure you got batteries, full batteries, and empty cards with you. Cards can get corrupted. I've seen that happen. So don't just be satisfied with the card that you have in your camera. Always bring a spare card. It doesn't matter if it's a small card, it will save you. You won't have to go back home and get get an extra card. And again, that weighs nothing. Like those SD cards, they weigh like a gram or less or something. So just have one stashed in your bag, and they cost nothing as well. So might as well have the extra card. Bring a spare battery. I know cameras do way better on batteries than they used to at this point. So some people just go out with whatever battery they have in their camera and they don't bring a spare. Well, the problem with that is I've seen, people who leave the camera, like the video mode gets switched on or the screen gets switched on by mistake, and then the camera's in the back during lunch, and then you finish lunch and then the battery's gone. The camera doesn't turn back on. And if you've gone to the right place, I was talking about right place, right time, you might be 20 miles from where you live, to get that spare battery. So it doesn't weigh that much. Just instead of the extra lens, put a battery in your bag. I only go with one lens, by the way. I only have 35 that I have on the camera. So I have lots of room in my bag to put, extra batteries and extra SD cards. This is not a gear-related mistake that I've seen students do, but this is very typical for me on the first day of a workshop, where people will come, and I don't know if it's the pressure of, they try to feel productive, or, there's lots of other students, so they want to make sure that they feel a little bit competitive, or they're afraid that they're not going to perform. And they will shoot like 2,000 frames in that first day of, a few hours of shooting. The problem with that is, I call it shutteritis. It's when you have your finger like this too much. And the problem with that is you're not really thinking through the methodology and how to approach subjects, and all the things that I teach in this class is basically all about being thoughtful and having sort of a method to get those shots. And if you keep shooting like this, I've gone to the end of the day with a student where I've had to edit at the end of the day. So look at all the photos they shot, and they had 2,000 plus shots. And in the end, there was not one select in those 2,000 frames. And that can be really disappointing, maybe embarrassing a little bit, to have shot so much and not have anything to show for it. So my point here is, don't just press the shutter to feel productive. Try to be, kind of thoughtful about where, like, pretend you have film in your camera, essentially, and you're going to have to pay like 30 cents per finger pressed on the shutter. I think that makes us all better photographers that way. You don't want to be, frozen where you don't take any pictures, but make sure you're not just always pressing the shutter without much, thought put into the picture. One other mistake that I see often is tunnel vision. This is Gary Winogrand, by the way, on the boardwalk, maybe in the 80s, I would say, or late 70s, early 80s. So Gary Winogrand was known to just be really quick with his camera. Like, he would have his camera kind of be fiddling with it, and then he would put it, and then he would bring it to his eye for like 1 microsecond and take the shot. And it would confuse people. Like, he would, come very close to people, and they wouldn't see him, they wouldn't anticipate that he would take a picture, but he would take a picture in such a fast way that they just were confused by it. So the point here is, often I've seen a lot of photographers where they just kind of keep the camera in front of their face, and because they're always trying to frame something. And it's much better to anticipate and pre-compose the frame in your mind, and then when you're ready to bring the camera to the eye, then you do that for a short period of time, take the shot, take the camera back down. Whether or not you've created the relationship with the subject, it's much more scary for the subject if you already always have the camera in front of your eye. It's very intrusive. It feels, kind of aggressive. You want to have the camera in front of your eyes the least possible. And there again, it's that lens, having the fixed lens where you can pre-visualize what you're going to get is really helpful, because you don't have to do that as much. You really know what you're going to have in your frame without even bringing the camera to the eye. I forget if I might have so you don't need the sound for this, but you see how he's basically barely putting it in front of his eyes. He knows what he's going to get. Boom, he gets it. Boom, boom. And this was you still had to wind. I mean, this is a film camera. He has to wind the camera and everything, and still he's that fast. I'm not saying you have to be this fast, but see how he's like pretending not to do anything. He's like fiddling with the camera. So anyway, that was his thing. But the point is, don't have the tunnel vision of keeping the camera in front of your face, or you can't see everything that's around you. Something else might be happening that you're missing. If you want to practice this visualization thing, by the way, that I was talking about, there's a very easy method to do that. Even if you have a zoom, like I said, tape your zoom to 28 or 35 or whatever your favorite angle is for street photography, and practice at home. And you're like, okay, well, I'm going to stand here, and I think between the couch and the lamp, this is the shot. This is the boundaries of the shot. And you look, and then, oh no, I was wrong. I have to go take one step back. And you basically practice it at home to kind of get a sense of what distance from subjects gets you what angle of view. And again, if you stick with one focal distance, one focal length, like 28 or 35, you should get the hang of it pretty quickly. And then in the street, you'll be a lot faster, being able to pre-visualize all these things. Last mistake, I think, in this list is high pressure. And, to pressuring yourself to find opportunities. If you're in the street and you're like, pressure, I haven't gotten anything today, I got to get something. It's out of your control. I mean, if you've got the right, your menu that we talked about, and you're doing all the right things, sometimes things just don't happen. There's not that much going on. And, I know if you're in a workshop or something and you really feel like you need to produce, it can be stressful, but pressure is really the enemy, because it really ends up, you'll look at your shots at the end of the day and you're like, why did I even press the shutter for this? So the flip side of this is like missing a moment. Nothing happens, and all of a sudden there's this great moment that happens and you missed it. And the worst thing you can do is start pulling your hair out like this person, and like trying to see if you got it. Like maybe you pressed the shutter but it was too late, and you start looking at your screen, and lo and behold, as you do this, the moment happens again, or another moment happens, and you missed it again. So the first thing you want to do, it should be basically like a prompt. If you see something that happens and gets away, that means something else might happen right after that, and you have to get ready. It should be, instead of kicking yourself, basically you have to get into the get ready mode, which means you're not looking at your screen. You shouldn't be looking at your screen. It's called chimping in street photography speak, and just don't do it, because again, that moment might appear as you're chimping in your camera. You can always look at your shots later, unless, the only way that I think it's okay to chimp is you get to a new location, you want to make sure it's exposed properly, you take a test shot, you look at the camera, does the lighting look okay? I think that's okay to chimp for that. But to see if you got the moment or not, don't worry about it when you're shooting. Worry about it when you get home. When you're shooting, you should just be totally undistracted and going after that moment. So that was the end of the topic, and I'm going to go back and conclude here, because I know we got to move on. So just these are all the topics that are in this recipe of mine. That's really, I call my street photography masterclass. For those who are interested, so up to a month ago, that class was not cheap. It was quite expensive, but I just lowered the price. So if people are interested, it used to be $4.99. Because I had more involvement. I had a weekly meeting with the participants and everything, and it was fine. I don't think it added a ton. We could answer some questions and stuff, but people are always free to email me when they're signed up for the masterclass anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. But by not having this hour every week, I was able to lower it to $149, which is much more affordable for everyone, especially for such a comprehensive methodology. So if you are interested in other topics that are in this methodology of mine, in my recipe, please do go to courses.dotansaguy.com. So the URL is right there, and the current price is $149. I might decide to bring it back up at some point, but for now I really want to make it accessible, and it seems like a lot of these topics are of interest to a lot of people. I'm happy that we were able to cover a couple today for free, and you got all the other ones for low price. So that's about it, Scott.
Awesome. I did want to go back to one question before
Yeah.
before we let you go, because it was pertinent to what we were talking about before. James wanted to ask, if you were trying to farm, how do you approach the subject?
If you were trying to, sorry, I missed that first part.
If you were trying to farm, how do you approach
Yes.
the subject?
Oh yeah, so this is something I talk about quite in depth in this course. I mean, essentially, you want to make them comfortable with your presence. So I tend to start with a compliment because it puts people at ease, and it shows, good intentions and so on. So it could be as silly as, I don't know, I love your hat, love your sunglasses, where are you from? Or I don't know, like some way to engage them in a way that seems, interested. And people love when you express interest in them. I mean, I've almost never gotten any kind of negative reaction to a compliment. So it starts the conversation, and then from the compliment, typically I go into, being very transparent about what I'm doing. So I'm explaining I'm, a street photographer. Usually I'm doing some kind of a project. So I explain what kind of project I'm doing, why I found their hat or their dog or whatever interesting. And then, sometimes I don't even pull the camera out of the bag while I'm talking to them. So it's just, I'm not jumping the gun on trying to take pictures. My first priority when I'm farming is to make the subject comfortable with my presence and to establish trust. I mean, it's essentially, that's what photojournalists do. And it's, or documentary photographers for that matter. So it's really getting into that mode of establishing trust before you can be permitted or allowed to stick around and be that fly on the wall.
Awesome, wonderful. And then John was asking, and I believe that I'm going to be correct here, but can you take the class remotely? That would be a
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Oh, so yeah, I should specify this class is not a live class. It's a pre-recorded class. So the beauty of it is I think it's about 10 hours, 8 hours of content that are all pre-recorded, and they're carved out exactly as you see them here. And you can, not only can you do it at your own pace, but let's say you go through the whole thing and you go shoot and you're like, oh, I know I watched the thing, but I'm still confused about how to, approach people in a farming situation. Well, when you get home, you can go and watch it again. And once you subscribe to it, it's available for, I mean, once you pay the fee, it's a one-time fee and it's available to you for 2 years. So you have 2 years to go back to it as often as you want and rewatch anything you want. There's also exercises in there. So I have some assignments that, people can, or, it's up to you whether you want to do them or not. And there's quizzes also to kind of make sure you got all the content and you understood everything. So it's a pretty comprehensive thing. And frankly, I think it was actually well priced at $500. So at 149 is really a steal given the amount of content that there's in there. But at this point, for me, it's already recorded. I might as well, have as many people as possible benefit. And that's it's totally at your own pace.
Awesome, wonderful. Well, Dotan, I want to thank you again for being here. It's always great to hear from you, to see you, to kind of get into your mind a little bit. That's what we like to do here at the event space. But that's it. That's all the time we have for tonight. Thanks everybody for joining us, for participating, kind of navigating the course today. We'll catch you next time. This has been another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. Have a good night, everybody.